There's a number of brush presets that you can use in Photoshop as is, or you can customize them to create the painterly marks that you want to use in Photoshop. I'm going to create a new document at the default Photoshop size and then use Command 0 in order to zoom in. I've got the brush selected, but to reset it, I'm going to right-click on the icon in the options bar and choose Reset Tool. Then I'll click on this icon here, and that's going to show me not only my brush settings, but also my brushes. So my brushes is where I go and find my default brushes. My brush settings enable me to change the options for my brush. Now I'm using a pressure-sensitive tablet, so you might not get the exact same results if you're using a mouse. We're going to take a look at the dry media brushes here. And I'll choose the third one down on the left-hand side here. Now, when I click and paint in my image area, depending on how hard I press with the pen, I'm going to get a different kind of stroke. Whereas if I'm painting with the mouse here, which I'll switch to, and I paint, you'll notice that I'm always getting kind of this solid stroke. Now, I could change the opacity of this, but again, that's going to be on a per stroke basis, and it's really not the same effect that I'm getting using the pressure-sensitive tablet. Let's take a look at a few other presets here. I'm going to use the wet media brushes, and I'm going to select this wet blender. And you'll notice that it actually has a different tool icon here. So it's switched from the brush tool to the smudge tool. And now when I paint over this area, I'm getting kind of this nice little smudge effect. Let's keep moving down and take a look at what's in these special effects brushes. I'll select the third one on the right here, this foliage brush, and now you can see when I paint, it actually looks like I've got a number of different leaves that I'm laying down. If we want to load more preset brushes, we can use the flyout menu here and choose to either load the legacy brushes, or we can even get more brushes online. I'm going to choose the legacy brushes because when I load these, I'm going to have access to a number of different natural media brush tips, which we'll take a look at in the brush settings. I'll click on the brush settings tab, and I'm going to start scrolling down until I start seeing some of these icons right here. But before I select one of them, let's go ahead and just return to kind of a more normal computational brush because I want to take off all those other settings. So I'll just choose this soft round pressure size, then go to brush settings, and then scroll down to find one of these natural media bristle tips. As soon as I select one of them, we actually get a 3D preview over here on the left-hand side that'll show me what the brush would look like. On the right, I've got my bristle qualities, so I can change this from maybe a round point brush to a round blunt brush. There are a number of different options, and then we can come in and we can say that we want maybe fewer or more bristles. We can change the length and the thickness and the stiffness and the angle, and we get a preview right down here of what that brush would look like. So now I can go ahead and start painting in the image area. But let's take a look at what tool I have selected. It's actually the mixer brush tool. So I'm going to switch back to just the regular brush tool and then choose brushes again to return to that soft round brush. All right, under brush settings, again, I'll just scroll down until I see one of those natural media bristle tips. And now when I paint, I get something very, very different because I'm using the regular brush tool. So not only is it important what preset you select, but also what tool you have chosen in your toolbar. All right, let's move on to some of the other options here. If I scroll down a little bit, we see a bunch of tips that look like they're airbrushes. And if I select one of those and we look at the preview down here, we get an estimate of what it's going to look like when I paint in the image area. But we can also change the options such as distortion and granularity or the spatter size or the spatter amount. Now to me that actually looks like it's a little bit clogged, so I'm going to decrease the spatter amount and I get a brush stroke like this. Again, unfortunately, if I'm using a mouse, which I'll switch to right now, it's going to be a very different brush stroke. All right, I'll scoot down a little bit more to one of these brush tips. These are the erodible points, and we can choose from a variety of different ones to start with. I'll start with the point, and then I'm going to make it a very soft brush just so that you can see if we're watching the 3D preview here and I start painting with this, you can actually watch as the tip of it erodes. Now it's very easy to resharpen it. I'll just click Sharpen Tip. All right, let's scroll down a little bit more. There's a number of tips that are custom tips. This one's been in Photoshop for a long time. It's this Dune Grass. So let's do a quick edit and fill, just to fill our canvas with white, and then we'll start painting with this. So if I just paint a stroke, it's actually quite boring because it just paints the same custom tip over and over again. But let's take a look at some of the different brush settings. I can go to my shape dynamics, click on that, and then I can change the size. So now as I paint with this brush, I get different size pieces of grass. I can set that pressure sensitivity as well. So now as I press lighter or heavier, I can get those different sizes. We could also change the angle jitter or the roundness jitter, but then it's kind of look like it's kind of been cut down like hay. So I'll leave those up. We can scatter them if we want to. I can scatter along a single or both axis. And again, all of these settings have the option for pin pressure. I can also set it to pin tilt and stylus wheel and rotation. So a lot of things to explore when you have time. This is just a basic overview. All right, we'll pick color dynamics because this is quite fun to play with. I can jitter the hue, the saturation, or the brightness. So hue is going to jitter, but you'll notice nothing happened the first time. I actually have to pick up the pen and paint again. So it's jittering it, but only every time that I do a paint stroke. If I want to apply it per tip, then I will check that. And now just with a single paint stroke, we can see that that hue is being jittered as I paint. Of course, we don't have to do hue. We could do saturation or brightness or whatever we want. Now I'm going to return to the brush presets for just a moment. And I'm going to select that chunky charcoal brush preset that we were looking at a moment ago. Then I'll click on brush settings, and this is a great way to figure out what attributes were used in order to create that brush. So if I click on texture, for example, we can see that this brush actually creates a texture, and this is the texture up here. If I wanted to change it, I could go ahead and select it and then select the texture here, or use the gear icon and load additional textures. If I paint with it, we can see the texture. And if I decided to do something like invert the texture, I could see if that gives me a different result. We can also change the scale of the texture or the brightness or the contrast, and we can see it update right below in that preview area. So if I want that same effect but a little bit lighter, I can just adjust those settings. There's also an option for a dual brush. This means I'm actually taking a brush and then painting through another brush tip. So if I select a different brush tip, maybe I'll pick one that looks like it's really gloppy. I'm going to look for something here that seems pretty obvious. Maybe something like this will do it. Of course, I could also change the blend mode here. So I could change it to multiply and see how that affects the brush tip. All of these different options, and just vary either the texture or the look of the brush as I paint it. If you do make a custom brush that you really like, you'll probably want to save that so that you can come back to it later. So at the bottom of the brush settings panel, I'm going to click on the plus icon here, and I'll just add JK to the very beginning of this. And you can choose whether or not to capture the brush size, include tool settings, so that would be things like opacity and flow, and whether or not you want to include your foreground color. I'll leave those two off for now and click OK. And I return to the brushes panel. We can see there's the new brush preset that I just created. So as you can see, there are a lot of controls available in the brush settings that you can take the time to explore on your own. If you want to learn more about painting tools such as the mixer brush or custom brushes or painting along a path, be sure to watch my other videos in the painting sections of the Photoshop Essential Training for Design.